And because of that scale, we're talking about big numbers. So when we talk about the commercial and the finance implications, I think that scale is really important. When I started at the MOJ, my first civil service role, in fact, having been in the private sector previously in 2019, just before I started, I inherited a large number of big outsourced IT contracts that were just about coming up to their expiry. So not only did, in my first 3 months, we have to walk into the dealing with the reaction to the COVID pandemic, but we also needed to look at what the replacements for those contracts would be. And the traditional approach would have been just to reprocure the same services in the same way. Several challenges to that. Firstly, most of the internal capability within the MOJ had been outsourced, so we didn't have much technical capability within the organisation. We had assurance functions rather than doing functions. So our first challenge was we didn't actually know to a sufficient level of detail what services we were actually receiving from those outsourced suppliers. So that was challenge number one. Secondly, because we had been assuring and not really working with suppliers, it had turned into a very transactional relationship, and the services that our users were receiving weren't really fit for purpose. So to reprocure the same things in the same way, definitely not the right choice. So over the last 2 years, whilst navigating the challenges of the COVID pandemic, which I think actually, looking back, has done us some huge benefits in terms of the visibility that it's given to those back-end workplace technology services. Michael, earlier this morning, was talking about how difficult it is to secure funding for some of those things that are seen as back-end overheads, potentially. But I think what the COVID pandemic did was showed how important a flexible, dynamic, fit-for-purpose and robust technology platforms are in enabling a productive and efficient organisation. So I think that built foundations to have a really good conversation with the organisation about how we changed the way these services were delivered. So over the last 2 years, we've been building internal capability, in the first instance so that we can work more collaboratively with our incumbent suppliers, but mainly also to build that foundational capability to make sure that we are procuring and or delivering internally fit-for-purpose services for the organisation over the next 5 to 10 years. And what we're really keen on doing is that this isn't just a procurement exercise. So in terms of the vision that we've got within the multidisciplinary team, it is more about changing the way that we are delivering these services, changing the way that we invest in these services, moving away from a spend 100 million or so, which I know I'm throwing out big figures, but when we're talking about 1,000 sites to migrate from one network provider to another, that's a 3-4 year transition project and a big number associated with it. And what I want to move away from, what the Evolve project that we've launched is designed to do, is move us away from that big bang £100 million investment and then that fairly depressing life cycle that from every day after we implement it, it's gradually getting worse until it gets so bad that we have to mobilise another £100 million project just to bring it up again. Those big projects are disruptive, they are expensive, they are the network one is a good example in that when I started, we were just about finishing the migration from our previous network migration and reprocurement exercise. We'd only just finished it before we needed to reprocure the next iteration. So really keen that we get away from that seesaw or saw edge investment cycle. So it's going to require changes in finance models. So the way you get money in government historically is to mobilise a project, and you implement that transformation effort or that service delivery in a big bang. We need to change the dynamic so that instead of spending 100 million every 7 years or so, we're spending 20 million every year or less, hopefully less. And we can show the total cost of ownership over the 5-year period is less, but it changes the dynamic. We need to increase our BAU run budgets, which is going to be a difficult story to sell. And from a commercial perspective, one thing that I think we've done, which has been a real success, is that our multidisciplinary teams haven't just been delivery managers, engineers, product managers. They've involved commercial, they've involved finance. So we're all on the journey together, all going towards a common objective. And that's worked really well. And we're also looking at breaking up the monolithic contracts. So where services can be made portable, we're making sure that we are ring-fencing them so that they remain portable, and we're procuring them in such a way that we can move those services from one supplier to another fairly regularly, fairly repeatably, and fairly easily, whilst we internally are maintaining the core foundation, the core intelligence that is difficult to move from one supplier to another. So we're really setting ourselves up to be able to manage the life cycle of these contracts and these services for the longer term. But there's a long way to go, and I think it's come up several times that the education, the upskilling of investment committees, of ministers, of permsecs, of ministerial special advisors and things is going to be really important to make sure that this is a sustainable transformation rather than, as Megan was talking about, sort of spot progress, if you like.
Thank you, Mark.
So lots to do.
Yeah, it's great. It's a big shift for an organisation with 40,000 staff of this.
85,000, yeah.
85,
yeah.
Is it? Right, yeah. Good luck with that, yes. I'm trying to sound sarcastic. Don't laugh at me. Christina, can we go to... Christina.
Yes. First of all, is it working? Yes. First of all, I'd like to thank you for the invitation to be here. I'm very glad to be here to present a little of Brazil realities. We are a continental country with continental problems. So in the south and the southeast of the country, we have high technologies and capabilities. And in the north of the country, we have some places that power supply came just a few years ago. I'm going to present to your video, and I would like you to pay attention to how this project, it's a mission-oriented project, and I would like you to pay attention how is the project management of this project and the fundings. Please, can we play the video?
Um dos grandes desafios da saúde pública é o atendimento das comunidades remotas. Nessas regiões não existem nem equipamentos e nem médicos especializados. Muitas mulheres grávidas da região amazônica não têm um pré-natal adequado. A assistência de pré-natal é de suma importância para proteger a saúde da gestante e do bebê.
Hoje eu tenho um projeto que me orgulha e satisfaz muito, que é levar atendimento médico às populações originárias do Parque Nacional do Xingu, através da ONG Xingu Mais Catu, de colaborar com o atendimento médico do barco BS Abaré, que navega o rio Tapajós, atendendo a pequenas comunidades ribeirinhas, através da ONG Zoé. Cenários muito diversos do que vivemos nas grandes capitais.
Realmente, a questão da democratização do acesso à saúde é um dos grandes desafios dos países em desenvolvimento.
Nós, nos todas clínicas da Faculdade de Medicina da Universidade de São Paulo, estamos continuamente debruçados em pesquisas e buscando soluções eficazes para atender às necessidades da população, sobretudo daqueles que dependem do nosso sistema de saúde pública. A tecnologia pode ajudar nesse processo, fazendo chegar a medicina de qualidade, de maneira eficiente, com menor custo, ampliando o acesso.
O Inova-HC é um instituto de inovação ligado à FM e USP-HC para desenvolvimento de projetos de inovação na saúde.
Em janeiro de 2021, a Deloitte, que é a nossa parceira do projeto de inovação, procurou com a possibilidade de criarmos um projeto usando o 5G, isso ainda antes do leilão da Anatel. Aí nós fizemos aqui dentro das provas clínicas algumas sessões com os médicos, chegamos a 50 casos de uso que poderiam ter uma relação importante com o uso do 5G, e depois de uma análise de impacto por complexidade, nós endereçamos 2 casos. Esses 2 casos são os nossos projetos pilotos, mas nós estamos usando o 5G para analisar o impacto na saúde.
Um caso seria de inserir a camada de conectividade no projeto do professor Menezes. Teríamos a utilização de ultrassom portáteis por não médicos conectados via 5G a centros de referência, onde estariam os médicos especialistas. Deste modo, estaríamos resolvendo o problema de falta de médicos especialistas e equipamentos médicos em regiões remotas. Com um ultrassom portátil, seria possível realizar atendimento de pré-natal com maior escala. E outro seria mais voltado à eficiência e redução de custos hospitalares. Os equipamentos seriam conectados via 5G a esta sala de controle e as imagens seriam carregadas na nuvem em tempo real.
So I just like to show this case to show how a project in this scale can happen in Brazil. We have to involve a lot of different partners and different instruments for funding. There is not only one, but many different ones. And we could find some unexpected partners, like we have a bank that's not giving money to the project, but they are giving their IT infrastructure, and the cloud of 5G is all from a national bank, a private bank in Brazil. I'd like to give this final message that it's not important that if it's public or private, we have to think about the population and the citizens and work in a mission-oriented objective, so we can make we can bring more useful technology to the citizens. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christina. Hilary.
Thanks, Mark. Really excited to be here. And in Ontario, we've been through, I'd say, what is a somewhat typical journey for a jurisdiction that has decided to, A, hire an executive to be in charge of digital and data, to invest in a team, to start building things in a new way with a new approach. We've seen it play out in many different jurisdictions. And I would say the one thing that I did focus on and tried to start addressing very, very early on with our team's work was copying a bit of the playbook from the UK and seeing that they stood up their digital service team and immediately also said, but we have to essentially understand what makes good service. And so set standards, had some spend control, set things in motion to be able to essentially define what good looks like, are you meeting it, and how can we get these projects through good governance. And so instead of just building things, we started working on that very early as well. So getting standards in place, getting an assessment process in place. There is now legislation in place that defines my role as a statutory role and gives us the ability to set standards, have a little bit of a stick, in addition to just putting some of those exemplars on the hill, sort of the lighthouse projects that show what good looks like and that you can get things done in a different way. But we certainly have lived that mantra, show, don't tell. It's very important to get people behind you, get people with you, co-design, collaborate, build those interdisciplinary teams. But I will be the first to admit it is also nice to be able to do a little telling. And I think that project management, funding, procurement, it really wraps itself around the work that we're trying to do. I'll be the first person to stand up and say we need to invest. I heard this a little bit, maybe not these exact words this morning, but we need to invest in people. We need to invest in teams, not projects. Another way of saying that is we need to invest in outcomes. How can we have an outcomes-based framework for procurement, for describing to our ministers and our executives what we are trying to accomplish? Versus being really focused on a thing, on a solution, because I think I'm sure the stats have changed over the last decade, but one of the biggest research projects that was done in the U.S. about a decade ago showed that only. I'm going to get the statistic wrong, but just rest assured, the statistic is very low for IT projects that succeed or that ship anything. And so what teams like mine are able to do is show that agile doesn't have to be scary, that you can get it done, and that actually it accomplishes the things that the public service and the public sector worries the most about, which is risk and delivery and cost. Now, Agile certainly isn't always cheaper. Do not try to fight that battle. It may not be cheaper in the end. But to your point, you're saying, like, let's not say we're going to commit $100 million up front. Let's say we're going to start small, we're going to understand the outcome, and we're going to get ourselves there so that along the way, yes, maybe over 5 years, the total cost has, been about the same. But we're not having to do pieces of that again because we've had those feedback loops, we've had the understanding from the people we're delivering for at each step of the way, with each sprint, with each deliverable. We are learning more about what works and pivoting away from what doesn't work. So I think for me, it has been just that relentless focus on our users and on outcomes that has then enabled us to apply some of those same mentalities and mantras to the wraparound work, that is about planning, budgeting, forecasting, and funding. I've been asked many times if I could wave a magic wand, what would it be? And my first thought is, well, to get everybody to start small and to think small and have a hypothesis and iterate, get all teams working like that. But actually, I think that's the easy part. And I think my magic wand is to get government to match us, to be able to do that, to be able to let those teams plan in small increments, budget in small increments, and understand the work that we have to do to get a little bit more flexible in those areas.
Thank you, Hilary. Yeah, great. Interesting, the commonality around the strength of interdisciplinary teams in terms of making sure people understand on each side. And on the levers, I mean, in the UK, as Mark will remember, there was a period where the finance and digital went together, when there was, essentially, it would be government digital service telling Treasury, okay, you can give these guys the money, we've approved the digital design. How do you work the levers in Ontario?
I would say it's a few different things. It's also very interesting because the digital team as a unit has moved around government quite a bit. We've been in Cabinet Office in the heart of government. We've been in Treasury Board helping change some of those process and some of the levers. We've been in finance with the finance minister. So as our biggest champion, saying government has to change and be thinking about that digital first culture. But I think the levers have come from lots of different places. But again, going back to setting standards and having the process in place to do that assessment has been key. The thing is that the assessment journey can't just be checkboxes, and it can't just be a test. We've also had to build the capacity around that process to help people understand why they're not meeting a certain standard. That's actually the more important part. It's not the checkbox, and it's not pass or fail, but it's you didn't quite make it. Here's the tools that you need. Here's a user research plan. Here, is some training. Here's some ways we can build the capacity around that. And that actually you make friends that way as well, which is good, and that becomes a lever in and of itself.
Yeah, thank you. Andrew.
Yes, let me start by saying it's great to meet you all in person. I joined the government on February 1st, 2020, so I literally haven't seen a single person since I started the job. So I spent the first 4 weeks of my job building out this massive 3 to 5 year plan of how Iceland could become the leading country in the world in digital services. So in 4 weeks' time, the world closed down, as you know. And the minister came to me and asked me, well, about that plan, can you finish that plan this year or sooner? And so we've been working really hard since to achieve that. I don't think we did achieve that in that year. But we had to completely rethink how we would transform the government. I think we mentioned here this morning that this traditional approach, this legacy waterfall approach, procurement, RFPs and so forth, it just didn't work. I came from the private sector, and we are all about agile. I mean, I'm preaching to the choir here, and this isn't rocket science. But we decided to build the entire government tech stack up from ground up. And being a nimble, small country, we can actually move pretty fast. So we built everything from ground up. Obviously, we still have a lot of legacy systems as well, but we started sort of from scratch. We built everything open source in a very large open monorepo. We're building everything as cloud. We're going API first. we built, same as Kevin said this morning, like we're just using the playbook. We're not inventing the wheel. So we have a centralized service website. We actually also built an app. So I think not all countries have an app as well, but we also added an app. And we started off all of these critical services, ranging from digital service to maternity and paternity leave to a digital driver license. So something that over half of the Icelandic population now has in their pocket is a digital driver license, and it's a fully valid license in Iceland. So this allowed us to sort of move fast, and I think we've reached, we still have a long way to go, but I think we reached a certain critical mass of public services, and now we're starting to think more about how do we scale this up. My team is a small, nimble unit within the Ministry of Finance. We obviously work with, over 160 agencies, but we are now working on how do we scale this system up, and what's the balance between sort of the funding, like a centralized funding versus distributing the funding and so forth. But I want to mention I think the one critical success factor in our journey has been sort of our approach to procurement. As I mentioned, we definitely realized that it wasn't the right approach to have this traditional waterfall approach. So we completely made a U-turn. And we went through, we've done 2 now, a very large-scale interdisciplinary team procurement where we are recruiting about 20 different teams from private companies, ranging from some of the largest IT companies in the country to very small, innovative startups. And they're all working together in this national monorepo of building these projects. And so within this procurement, we're able to deploy our teams really fast. Obviously, we don't know, like as my colleagues mentioned, we don't know what $100 million project is going to be like in 5 years. We just start with small chunks. We start with small projects, low-hanging fruits. We show results and then continue and iterate from that. And the requirements are constantly changing. But with this approach, it has completely shifted dynamics, and it has massively accelerated our journey of sort of getting to the point where we want to be. So happy to talk more about that.
Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, really interesting answers. I'm going to ask one question before we go to questions from the floor. And it's about, because much of the value of digital is often realized by cross-departmental projects. Mm-hmm. Often you have different people putting in different bits of funding. So needed for cross-departmental management and implementation. But the money gets blurred, isn't it? And the accountability is blurred. And the people signing off funding on each side needs kind of clear accountability. What are they buying? It's hard to build a really collective endeavour when everybody in the team is kind of looking individually back up to their own funders. Have you found ways to kind of run and govern cross-departmental projects that sort of promote the right behaviours, provide the right incentives? I'll go, Mark, what are your thoughts on that one?
I think, I don't think we're particularly good at it in the UK. I'll start off with that. But I think for me, it's all about that communication and that clear, everybody sharing a clear common objective. And then the conversation can move to how do we iteratively chip away at the problem, following standards, define standards that guide everybody in the right direction, and that we don't start off probably going back to the same argument again of if we go and ask for, or anybody goes and asks for £100 million to solve this pan-government problem, the answer is going to be no. So we need to find ways to break it down and to gain consensus, to pretty much everybody here is talking about the fact that the way we secure the way we make progress is by talking to people, is getting people on board, is getting people working towards, as I say, that same common objective. And I think only when we're doing that across government and making time to do it as well, because part of the problem is that everybody could be looking at it thinking, great idea, but I'm already working 110%, or my teams are working 110% over here on what has been trickled down from permanent secretary in my department. So as I think it was, no, it was Kevin, it was Megan, wasn't it, talking about at the CDDO perspective of getting all of the permanent secretaries together to define what is important across government. And it's a really small example, but it's an example that can make a huge difference. During the pandemic, across UK government, we were unable to communicate effectively because some departments were on Google G Suite as their productivity and collaboration tool set. Others were on Microsoft Teams, others were dabbling with Zoom until things happened. Anyway, but we've now got a program of work that is looking to standardize that and and best integrate those tool sets where there is a justifiable need to have different tool sets in different organizations. But that is all coming together to that common objective, chipping away at the problem.
Thank you. Christina, any thoughts on that?
Yes, I think also have these main objectives established, then you begin to think, to have the mentality, the mindset of a startup company. So you go to look for the ones who can help in that specific problem that you have. So it doesn't matter if it's a department, a governmental department, or if it's a private company or some institution of the ecosystem, of the innovation ecosystem, the universities, research institutes. So all of them have some specific instruments that can be used to achieve this target. So I think you just need to convince all these people to gather this main objective and make things happen. And if each one say no, but we have to adapt some kind of work to this procurement instrument, and if it's okay to the other partners. And if the other partners can cover the uncertainties of this, then we can get these funding instruments or find another way to do. It's like a network, and if there is no way, if one way is not available, so you just go in another way to get that you need.
Thank you. Hilary?
Yeah, I think it's been a common theme, sort of talking about lessons learned from the pandemic. And I think one of the things that stood out to me with our teams that were trying to build products, again, in days, not even weeks, but in days, trying to get, whether it was websites out or ways to find PPE or book your vaccine, et cetera. Those teams, what made them successful was obviously great product management and good teams and all of the things that make great interdisciplinary agile teams work. But over and around all of them was basically a laser focus from executives, from stakeholders, et cetera, all of us saying, get that team what they need. And I think that as we came out of crisis mode, we have retreated a little bit back into our silos again. And so this one team now can't as easily reach, quote unquote, across the aisle or across a ministry to get to who they need to solve probably a fairly easy question and get a fairly easy answer, but they can't get to the right person as easily. So I think your comments sort of brought that back to me, which is, I think that is a huge piece of how we have to shift our governance and how we have to shift the support of these teams and these types of multi-departmental projects, procurements, et cetera, because it does make us really lean on a different kind of governance and a different mentality and a different framework for how we need to support that work to get done. I think establishing a clear owner, even if there's lots of people contributing, making sure that there is an executive and a team that is holding the vision and is holding the the backlog, the vision where we're headed, so that they then can rely on good communication and can rely on good governance to bring those things together, to bring an opportunity for everybody to surface the risks that they're seeing each week, for everybody to have those stand-up moments and say, yep, this is what's on board for me this week. Just a different way of communicating and understanding that we have to do that across ministry teams. We have to get rid of some of our, I don't think it's ego, but there's something there that once we get into day-to-day mode, no, I work for this program in this ministry and we do our thing, and it doesn't really pertain to you, and we have to break some of that down.
Yeah, thank you. Andre?
Yeah, so in terms of funding, we've taken a fairly centralized approach, as I mentioned. So, and it's more about project funding. So we don't allocate, so we're starting to do less of allocating funds to agencies. They apply to us, to Digital Iceland, for specific projects. And so those can be interdisciplinary and interdepartmental. And so they will get teams. So we will tell them they will apply for a certain project, and we'll say, well, this looks like a great project, so we will deploy teams for 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, whatever it takes for the project. And so that approach has sort of eliminated to some extent this, like, hey, this is my money, this is your money, when two agencies are working together. There's one other thing that it's been critical for us, both in terms of all the public or the private companies working for us, as well as agencies, is that we're talking about this as one national team. And so I use the analogy from soccer, or maybe ice hockey here. It's like you have these individual players in the local team. They're competing fiercely one against one another, but then they're chosen to the national team. And then they have to work together for the national team. And so we really talk about this analogy a lot. And we try to enforce this in everything we do and tell for people, like, we are using public money. This is for the greater good. We're using your tax money. And so we're trying to get people to think on a higher level, not just from their individual silos. And of course, this is a lot easier said than done. But this is a part of it. The last piece to it is that we are still working on sort of a better framework, legal framework, governance framework in terms of very large-scale IT investment. So when we have 20-year-old tax systems or legacy systems that need to transform for, a large amount of money, how do we operate that? And I think we still have a lot of work to be done in that sense. How do we do that? We're thinking the legal framework we're working on now is having sort of a review board. So there's a common review board, because there's so much difference between these big agencies. Just as we review, at least in Iceland, we review centrally all major physical investments, massive bridges, massive buildings, and so forth. And we're considering doing something similar with very large-scale IT investments.
Thank you, Andre, and thank you all for finding 4 different angles on the topic, which was good. Do you have questions from the floor? And we have a roving mic, which is going to make its way forwards. There's a gentleman here in blue. Yeah, sorry, towards the front here, the front table. Sorry, thank you.
Hi, the name is Gautam Subra. I'm with Shared Services Canada. We're a centralized IT provider. So first a quick comment, then a question. Comment is, Government of Canada was, I think, very lucky. We managed through Shared Services, cooperating with Microsoft, a very quick rollout of Teams across all the departments in a tenant set up for just that. So that enabled us to communicate across the departments. We also tripled our remote access capability. So that was a comment on what happened at the beginning of the pandemic. What I wanted to turn your attention to, and I'd really appreciate a comment from everyone on the panel, is how to sort of match or bridge the gap between governance of projects, which still seems to be stuck in a pre-agile, pre-digital age, where very much suited to a waterfall approach with gates and artifacts per gates, with what you're all talking about, which is a more agile, start with the low-hanging fruit, quick wins, that kind of approach. How do you bridge that gap?
It's a great question. We have had some comments on it already, so I'd ask you to keep comments brief if you could. We'll start with Andre, who's, of course, based in the Ministry of Finance, which may be helpful, I don't know.
Yes. Sorry, the question was?
It's about...
Yes, sorry. Jet lag coming in here. So bridging the gap, I think there's no clear one simple answer to it. I think for us is one, it's show by example, so that we have, for example, a conference of our own every single year. We invite all of the government agencies, and it's basically a way for us to showcase the agencies that are doing really well, our own projects, and so forth. So I think showcasing is one. The piece that I'm thinking most about now is the education piece, is the training piece, the coaching. As was alluded to here earlier, like the academy that was started in the UK. So I think that sort of approach is very important, because we will reach a point, and we're starting to see that in some sense in Iceland, where our unit is Iceland is becoming a blocker. Like we can't scale a small unit. We have to scale the knowledge. We have to scale the methodology, the agile. So we need to train other people to become our ambassadors, and I think that's the way to go.
Thank you. Hilary, any further comments?
Yeah, so we have a few different processes that digital and IT projects have to go through. To your point, some of them are gate-based, some of them are funding-based, et cetera. And what we have embarked on over the last year or so is, again, kind of setting up a hypothesis and being incremental about this ourselves, but thinking about what integrated governance really does need to look like. So our first step, our first hypothesis was, we're probably all asking some of the same questions. So why don't we just take some of that out, like lower the red tape a little bit for some of our programs and our projects. So that was the first step, was, okay, we're asking a question about technology, you're asking about a question about technology from an architecture perspective, and you're asking a question about technology from a funding perspective. Let's try to bring that together into one place and one time that the program has to answer it, and then we do that work to share the information. So that was sort of step one. But what's evolved from there is really trying to think about what it means to meet Agile projects with Agile governance, and to understand that they are doing user-based development. We need to also be doing some client-centric governance, if you will. How do we meet them, and how does our governance be right on time, just like their delivery is right on time? So we're not there, but we are publishing a few case studies, and hopefully those will be out over the next couple of months. They're on our intranet now, but we're hoping to make them public, because we have learned so much from this process about essentially the need to be pretty upstream with the kinds of questions and how we set people up for success from the digital assessment piece. But then, how does architecture review play into that? How does the Treasury Board assessment play into that? And so our integrated governance approach has been to really bring those pieces together, to understand how we can not just ask the same questions, but what gates can start to overlap, and how we can iterate towards something that really truly is integrated.
Yeah. I think the change of mindset is really slow. We can't do this from one day to other, and it comes to what has been already said about education and what we like to do. We have an internal news, and then because the people who work just inside the agencies and the ministries and the public departments, they all of them realize the impact of the projects. So we have videos like this one that I have showed. We have internal news to tell what's going on, what kind of results and the outcomes are being made with our work. This is important, so you can motivate one guy that just think about the accountability, about the financial funding. And I think this is important to remember the importance of our work in the in the country, at least.
Thank you.
I think almost the way you asked the question, in that bridging the gap, I think the first thing we need to understand is and work on is why that gap exists. Governance was put in for a reason. We need to understand that reason, and we need to address the concerns of the people, the boards, the organisations that put it in place, and we need to address the fact that most of the organisation will still want a date when a service or functionality will be delivered. We're never going to get away from that, so we need to acknowledge that and educate and guide all of the stakeholders on the journey that by following an agile methodology doesn't mean we can't commit to a date. In fact, it actually means we can probably deliver faster and better, but we need to take people on that journey, because there is a concern, I think, and in some ways I have a sympathy with it, that agile can be, no, we can't give you a date, it's on the backlog, it will be delivered when it's delivered. The organisation isn't going to stand for that, so we do have to bridge that gap, I think is absolutely what we need to do.
Thank you, Mark. We're very tight on time, but do we have any finance professionals with a question? This lady here.
I hope it. Am I on? Okay. I don't specifically have a finance question, but I do work in an area where we're an oversight function for the major projects in our organization. And one of the things we've been challenged with, I'd be interested to hear all of your experiences with the role that having a strong enterprise business architecture function would have in sort of getting this even started, and capability models and sort of how that's influenced. Because just for a bit of context, one of our challenges is organization priorities can shift. They tend to not be dramatic shifts, but I think a lot of us in the room have had experiences where, you know, the government will announce a new initiative, so suddenly everybody who's working on this needs to pivot to this because the legislation has to be in place by, you know, 2023. So just interested to hear your experiences with enterprise business architecture, if that was a factor in capability models, and how that either helped or hindered your journey to get where you are today.
And if we could do it in kind of a minute each, because these guys are hungry, I reckon. It's almost lunchtime. You content with that, Mark?
Enterprise architecture is something we at the Ministry of Justice are really focusing on now. It's not something for a variety of reasons, we've done particularly well in the past, starting with the fact that we are made up of 34 different agencies and arm's length bodies and all sorts of things. We've been built up over time. So in order to tackle our technical debt, in order to prioritise investment, in order to be able to tell our story better, we are absolutely investing in the capability and capacity within enterprise architecture, and we hope it will do all of the things that you were talking about there.
In Brazil, we had an experience because this old mentality that it's not possible to change. I work at the Ministry of Science and Technology, so how it's the risk of innovation, and you need to change. What happened is that in 2013, we have to find another innovation agency to hire people which are more broadly thinking and that can deal better with risks. And we have to found this new agency called Embrapi. It's a Brazilian agency to fund innovation projects. We had to do this way, and now it's working. And because it's not the legislation that has the prohibition, but sometimes people who are there just don't want to take the risk, and we have to build another institution to do that.
Thank you.
Not a direct answer to your question, but I think if I had yet another magic wand, I would wave it and just essentially, hopefully set up the foundations. Because I think if we can, in my perfect world somewhere, essentially we've got platforms, we've got components that are not dependent on one another, but that work together. Each of those passing a certain, muster to ensure that it is living up to our enterprise architecture standard, but that those then enable any program, any CIO to say, I need a service that does this, X, Y, Z. It needs to be able to notify people. It needs to be able to communicate. We've got all of those components. We pull them together, and we already know that it's safe, secure, built to spec, et cetera. So that's my other magic wand.
Thank you. Audrey.
Sure. Very quickly, I think we're thinking a lot about this. I don't think there's one simple solution or answer. Like, we look at the overall business architecture. We have a lot of guides, design guides, API guides, and tools, and so forth for all these different agencies, CIOs to work with. We also, I think the key is data sharing, so unbundling of this architecture so that we can share data openly and between agencies. So that way we can slowly, if there's a legacy system, start unbundling it. We can connect it with newer systems, whether it's in-house or external businesses and architecture. So in short, yeah.
Thank you all very much for that. And thank you guys for joining us. If you could just thank our panel for their excellent answers, then we'll go to some lunch.